Our next segment is on energy and environment, and we're delighted to have with us one of the leading attorneys in Kentucky on these matters, and that's Carolyn Brown of the Greenbaum, Dahl, and McDonald law firm. They're in Louisville and Lexington. Carolyn happens to be headquartered in Lexington. So, Carolyn, why don't you ask the first question?
Great, thanks, Dave. One of the major signature industries in Kentucky, obviously, is our coal industry. The Chamber's Board of Directors recently returned from a meeting in Pikeville and had an opportunity there to interact with a lot of people in eastern Kentucky. And there is a real sense that the people there feel that they are under attack from Washington. And so our question is, what role do you believe that coal should play in our nation's energy mix now and in the future?
Well, I think coal's a very important part of it. You know, we get over 90% of our electricity from coal. And even if you thought you wanted to be for a transition to another energy form, that should be something that happens over 50 to 100 years, not something that they try to shove down our throat from Washington in a year's time. The president, the current president, through his EPA basically, and this I think is intriguing, no significant laws have changed between President Bush and President Obama. But if you ask people in the coal industry or the workers or anybody out in eastern Kentucky, it's dramatically different because the people he appointed to run the EPA are so vehemently anti-coal that they're not giving permits, they're not allowing mining to happen. When the permits are issued, they have so many restrictions on them that many are deeming these as if they can't even do business under this permit, so they're not even going to try to get the permit enacted to begin work. Some coal companies are now suing the federal government under a takings clause because their property, they're saying, you've taken my property. I can't use my property because I can't get a permit to mine coal. And so I think it's night and day, but it also shows you that unelected bureaucracies like the EPA are out of control. When the EPA can issue a press release that says, if Congress doesn't pass greenhouse emissions testing, we will. And it's like, my goodness, a regulatory agency is lecturing Congress and saying they will do it. And then we had a vote a little bit later where it was brought up in the Senate to say, you know what, the EPA shouldn't be allowed to do this without authority by the Senate. And it lost 53 to 47. But it shows that even in Washington, about a little less than half of the people up there recognize that these agencies are out of control. I think if you discuss it with people in eastern Kentucky, it'd be about 90% of people think the EPA is out of control. And so really we need to rein in these out of control bureaucracies, and there is legislation to do this. Congressman Davis from our state and Senator DeMint from South Carolina have a bill called the RAINS Act. And in it, they say any regulation that's going to cost more than, I think they said $100 million would have to be voted on by Congress. I told them I think we need to lower that amount. But I really think that Congress should write the rules because you can bring your congressman home. But how do you bring home the head of the EPA? You can't. You know, you have no control over these bureaucracies that outlast congressmen, they outlast senators, and they even outlast presidents.
Well, that's a very interesting comment because I think one of the concerns that we have seen from the business community is how do you rein in federal agencies where you don't have elected personnel? One follow-up, you talked earlier about your position on cap and trade and that legislation. Again, we have the Environmental Protection Agency proceeding down the path of regulating greenhouse gas emissions under the Clean Air Act, which the Clean Air Act was never really intended to address. What is your view about the greenhouse gas regulatory issues, the legislative piece? What are your views on that and how we address it?
Well, it's amazing what they legislate under the Clean Water Act, you know, because they're all of a sudden deciding new rules all the time from the EPA, not from Congress. You know, what is a navigable stream? Now they want to get rid of the word navigable, which would be any runoff of water anywhere is all of a sudden going to be under the EPA. They regulate how much water is in your toilet. You know, they regulate how much water comes out of your shower heads and what kind of shower heads you can get. All by edict from unelected bureaucracies, and I think it's a real problem and they need to be restrained. Part part of my reason for running for office is that it's not just that I think we need another Republican. I think we need reform of the whole system. It's an out-of-control bureaucracy that needs to be restrained. So things like this REINS Act will be something that I will be all over to say, this is a reform of government. Government's not operating the way it was intended. The bureaucracies have grown so large that they are controlling and running government. In fact, I've been thinking recently, I'm for term limits for politicians. Maybe we should have term limits for heads of regulatory agencies as well, where they have to be rotated in and out of office as well. Or maybe we have two that come in and it's a bipartisan commission that runs these agencies and not just one head. But there are serious problems, and we have to do something to restrain them.
In the energy area, there's a lot of discussion about different sources of energy and funding for innovative technologies. Should the federal government subsidize new forms of alternative energy like wind or solar, even if they're not feasible to use in all 50 states?
I'm for all types of energy to be developed. I think the marketplace, though, determines what is most efficient, and we shouldn't subsidize things that make no economic sense. So if something costs more to produce than the value you get out of it, it shouldn't be done. But I think there is a role for wind, and there is a role for solar, and I think they'll never probably comprise more than about 5% of our energy source, and that's probably even with assistance. You know, you're not going to power Los Angeles' electricity needs or New York's electricity needs with windmills and with solar panels. But should we do some of it? Yes. Allow it to happen. Don't get in the way of it, but allow the marketplace to see if it can be part of it. I think nuclear should be part of our future. Even though I'm a big defender of the coal jobs in our state, I think we're going to need more energy, so we need more sources. There's nothing wrong, and as a state, we should make nuclear power legal. One of the good things we have, because we have the coal industry here, is we have that electric grid that goes across the northern part of our state. So we're set up in a perfect opportunity to bring in nuclear power plants. There are many counties I've already talked to. Out in Paducah, they'd love to have a nuclear power plant. They already do. They have the enrichment program out there, the nuclear enrichment, and they'd be set up perfectly. They have a lot of skilled workers to do a nuclear power plant. So I'm in favor of all of them. Let's try to get government out of the way and decide. Coal will still be able to do very well because coal usually outcompetes all of them on cost.
You talked about the grid that we have across the northern part of the state. Periodically we have input from our Public Service Commission about the development of the grid, the condition of the grid. What is your view as far as the federal government involvement with being sure that we have a grid system across the country that's able to handle transmission of energy?
I think most of the grids and most of the wiring are owned by the utility companies, correct? And I think they need to make provisions, you know, and there need to be provisions within their rates for keeping capital improvements. The same way with the plants, you know, our electric plants, our rural electric cooperatives. I think they build into their system of fees money that's set aside for capital improvement. I think we should continue to do that.
What about the issue which you can run into when you're trying to site new transmission lines of opposition to the siting locations? Do you see that's something that the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, FERC, should be more involved with as contrasted with the states, or have you given any thought to that?
I really
issue?
haven't got into the detail of that to know enough about it, but I can tell you from meeting people, one, the new judge executive in Lewis County would love to have a power plant up there, nuclear or coal-fired. I can tell you out in Paducah they'd love to have a nuclear power plant, and I think it would pass overwhelmingly with local vote because they are struggling. We're in a struggling economy, and they would see the jobs that would come into there, and both of them are on the electric grid, and so I think both of those would be good locations. There are probably others too, that by mentioning two I'll hear from the others as well. But yeah, I don't think it's a problem of getting local opposition. In fact, people in Kentucky I think are probably more receptive. You know, try building a power plant near San Francisco, you might have a problem. But I think in Kentucky, we're pretty receptive and open to the fact that we have to have electricity. Another thing we need to realize is so many people from the other side, the environmental extremists, want to make it as if, you know, New York's drowning, the Statue of Liberty is going to be underwater, and the polar bears are drowning, and all this nonsense. But the thing is, the air is 30% cleaner than it was 30 years ago. We're doing a much better job. Look at the pictures of Pittsburgh in 1915, where a white shirt would be covered with soot at noon and the street lanterns would be on at noon. We polluted a lot more 100 years ago. We pollute a lot less and have more people. So we're doing many things right, and we need to be proud of that. Can we do better? Yeah, there are probably instances where we can continue to do better, but we shouldn't shut down all of industry because we have some environmental extremists who say that we have to quit burning coal. And those are the people that populate President Obama's administration. These are not mainstream people. These are people way out on the left who know nothing about industry, and they think when you plug your electric car into the wall that there's no emissions with that. They don't understand anything about how electricity is produced.
Thank you, Dr. Paul, for your answers on that.